Hi everyone, my name is Vaibhav Wadekar. I am lead technical support analyst and working through the digital workplace platform. Today we're going to talk about troubleshooting the providers. So this is the agenda of the meeting: introduction to provider references, list of providers, and troubleshooting provider use cases. So we're going to see what is exactly the provider does in digital workplace. And we're going to talk about the provider that come along with digital workplace. And we're going to learn about a couple of use cases regarding the provider's errors and then how we can troubleshoot those errors and the material that we have available at this point to troubleshoot those errors. So let's talk about introduction to provider. So what provider is, provider allow you to communicate to other system components. Basically the digital workplace, when you start the Apache Tomcat, it loads the bunch of providers. And with the help of that providers, the digital workplace can communicate with the Remedy AR system, the LDAP, the exchange providers. And the way you can configure the provider is with digital workplace administration console. And the second is the tenant configuration utility. In this webinar, I'll show you ways of accessing both. So let me quickly log into the digital workplace administration console. Here I'm going to type it in the URL for digital workplace. The user has to have the MyIT admin permission in order to log into the digital workplace admin console. So here you can see within the configuration section, you'll see a different list of providers which you can enable and disable. So this is one way of accessing the providers and setting up your providers. The other way is the tenant configuration utility. This utility is actually, you can run it from the system, or you can take the utility and run it from your desktop. So the utility is present under Windows. You can see the path is C program files, BMC software, Smart IT, MyIT, Smart IT, MyIT, tenant config. That's the folder structure for Windows. In case of Unix, the folder structure is OPT, BMC, Smart IT, MyIT, Smart IT, MyIT, tenant config. And the actual providers, basically the jar files, are located under Tomcat external connect provider directory. So the location, as you can see from the slide, for Windows it will be Tomcat 80 external connect provider, and in case of Unix it will be OPT Apache Tomcat 85 external connect provider. So the way it works is you have the jar files, and in the Smart IT system schema we list down all those jar files and put a setting whether that is enable or disable. You can check it from the provider and provider settings table. So I'll quickly run through the tenant config utility and then show you. I showed you the MyIT admin console. So I'm going to run through the tenant config utility and show you that as well. So here I'm on my Linux box, and I'm at the location, as I mentioned, is Smart IT, MyIT, tenant config scripts, Linux. I'm going to show you the file called setenv.sh. So here you have to provide some parameters like what is your MyIT URL, the user who has the MyIT superadmin and MyIT admin privileges, the tenant name. For example, company, if you have Calbro services or some other company, you can define that here in the company section. And the SAML authentication. If you have integration with RSSO, the SAML authentication parameter holds true. And the tenant host name, which is basically the MyIT server name. Once you fill out these details, all you have to do is, for example, I'm getting the information about the tenant which is enabled or disabled at this point. By running this utility, I got to know that these are the providers and these are the settings available for that provider. So you can see that the host name this is the tenant ID, and these are the providers. I'll go to the next slide and talk about the list of providers that come along with Digital Workplace and Smart IT. As you know, the Digital Workplace Basic combine the installer with the Smart IT. So the provider that also get loaded both from Digital Workplace, Smart IT, and HR Case Management. So in this slide, you can see that we're going to talk about the provider that is available with the Digital Workplace. So the first provider is User Detail Pluggable Provider. This provider actually used when you authenticate from Digital Workplace. So whenever you pass on the username and password in Digital Workplace, it will be used with this User Detail Pluggable Provider. Will try to connect to the Remedy AR system and validate that user. So if this provider is disabled, you may not be able to log into Digital Workplace. The second provider is Group Pluggable Provider. As the name suggests, when you using a broadcast feature, if you want to send a broadcast to the groups, this particular provider being used. So you have to make sure that between Group Pluggable Provider and LDAP Pluggable Provider, one of these has to be enabled in case of broadcast. So if the Group Pluggable Provider is enabled, make sure the LDAP Pluggable Provider is disabled, and vice versa. Like LDAP Pluggable Provider is enabled, then the Group Pluggable Provider has to be disabled. The third provider is Exchange Pluggable Provider. So with this, you can integrate with the Microsoft Exchange, and what it basically does is with this provider, you can able to reserve the conference room. I'm going to show you the quick demo about it in next few slides. The fourth, as I mentioned, is the LDAP Pluggable Provider. So if you want to send a broadcast to the LDAP groups, so basically you can set up this LDAP provider, provide the host name, the base URL for the Active Directory, and you should be able to send a broadcast to the LDAP groups. The fifth one is the RKM Pluggable Provider. As the name suggests, whenever you search any item from the catalog, you'll be presented with the catalog items as well as the knowledge articles that is available. So whatever is the knowledge data that is retrieved within the catalog is with the help of RKM Pluggable Provider. So if this provider is disabled, you may not be able to see the catalog's entries come up within the catalog search. And there are some scenarios where customer creates the custom RKM templates, and they have to pretty much define those custom RKM templates within the pluggable provider in order to make a search against those custom templates. The next provider is CMDB Pluggable Provider. This provider actually basically used to import the CMDB assets to the locations. When you're using the locations within your maps, this particular provider being useful. Another provider is SRM Pluggable Provider. So with the help of SRM Pluggable Provider, you can retrieve the services or SRDs that is available within SRM that is being presented within catalog. So if your provider is disabled, you may not be able to see the action of the catalog items within a Digital Workplace catalog. The next one is BPPM Pluggable Provider. As the name suggests, what it does, basically it integrates with BMC Proactive Net. So let's say you have 1,000 services hosted within BPPM. You can monitor or you can follow those services from Digital Workplace, and you can do so with this BPPM Pluggable Provider. The next provider is a CLM Cloud Services Pluggable Provider. This provider basically, as the name suggests, if you have a CLM offering, Cloud Lifecycle Monitoring offering, basically request a VM and those sort of requests that you do within the CLM, that can be done from the DWP as well once you configure this pluggable provider. So all you have to do is put the CLM URL, REST URI, and then put a super key password. I'll show you that in the next slide. The last provider for digital workplace family was system management pluggable provider. This is being used basically on the maintenance side of digital workplace, like health check and other stuff. We've been used the digital workplace, this system management pluggable provider being used at that point. So let's take an example of exchange provider, as I mentioned. So here you can see that I logged into the digital workplace admin console and I made sure that this provider is enabled. By enabling this provider, there are certain properties for that provider that you need to set in order to enable that provider. And that is, for example, in this case, we have to give a username. This user must have an ability to reserve a conference rooms and reserve an asset. So this is the exchange URL. You have to make sure that this exchange URL is available from the MyIT box. So let me quickly show you, once you configure this provider, what exactly happens. So on this system, I have exchange pluggable provider enabled, and you can see that once I log in, the way I can tell is I can go to this timeline and see this is available. So this is coming from Exchange, just like, and here I can pretty much say I would like to reserve something. So I'm going to reserve the dining room here and then say reserve. You can see that this is actually reserving an asset within your location map that you defined. And the same has been shown here in the timeline. As you can see, user Alan Albrecht has reserved conference room for this and this date. So this is the use of Exchange pluggable providers, which most of the users sounds useful. The next one we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about a couple of the provider use cases. So here you can see that the use cases, customer upgraded from, let's say, 3.302 to 3.4 of digital workplace. And one of the things that he notices that though the upgrade said it was successful, he may not able to get to the application showing the login page. So one of the reasons for that is, as you know, that the install happens in steps like pre-install step, post-install step, database upgrade. So one of the things that we notice is the installation did not finish the post-install configuration activities. And what that is basically deleting the existing providers from 3.302. It just have both references, 3.302 as well as 3.4. So what had happened when the Tomcat started, it tries to load the jar files for both 3.302 as well as 3.4. What I mean by that is, let me just quickly show you the provider directory structure. So if I go to OPT, Apache, Tomcat, external connect providers, this is where all the providers get loaded. For example, if I take an example of SRM, so here you can see that I have a SRM 3302 build snapshot.jar. So in customer case, what had happened is this 3302, which should have been removed after the upgrade, was not get removed. And because of that, the Tomcat tried to load both the jar files, one from 3302 and the other one from 3.4. And this is what exactly that you see in the log file. If you need to take a look at the log, you can see that right here. The Tomcat has been loading, and I think it is saying that cannot resolve the reference bin pluggable provide manager. So it tries to load the jar, but it could not load, and it gives the error. So the solution for that is make sure that there is only appropriate provider exists within one of those folders. And I have created a KA for that to document that solution. So if you see any sort of error within the localhost logs within the Tomcat regarding the provider, make sure that within external connect provider, go to each individual folder like SRM, CMDB, and see only one jar exists for that specific version. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is you're unable to log into Digital Workplace or MyIT. As I mentioned, there is a provider, user detail pluggable provider, which actually take care of the authentication. So if that provider itself is disabled, you may not able to log into that particular MyIT or Smart IT. And the way you can do it is you need to update the provider settings table. So I'll quickly show you how to validate the database and how to actually check whether that provider is enabled or not enabled. So I logged into the Digital Workplace admin here, and you can see that there should be a user data pluggable provider which is enabled. So this is the provider which is enabled. For some reason, if it is disabled, you have to do that from the database, and I'll show you where to get the database detail and how we can validate that information. So I'm at my Linux box again. I'm going to go to this folder structure, OPT Apache Tomcat Conf. Within Catalina localhost, we have a file called ux.xml. Here you can see that we have references for Smart IT, system DWP, and the database is this. I'm going to quickly access that database and show you. So I logged in here, and here is my Smart IT. Okay, so here within the tables, you should be able to see the data. These are the providers and whether it is active or passive. So for example, user detail pluggable provider, which is 1, that is main active. So if it is disabled, the value should be shown as 0. So within provider setting as well, you can see that all the associated references for that provider, you can pretty much define that here within the provider settings table. So the solution for here is update the provider settings table to enable the pluggable provider. We enabled that. I documented that solution in the KA 120701. Let's go to the next use case. So here, as I mentioned, unable to search against custom RKM template in DWP. So as I mentioned, if we log into the DWP admin console right here, and if you go to the RKM pluggable provider, here you can define the custom RKM template. So if you created any custom RKM templates, you have to update this column and list your custom RKM template and then reload that provider in order to see the search result for that particular custom template. So I documented that solution as 115022. And within ux.log, you'll be able to see that the search did not made against the custom RKM template if you have not defined that. The next I would like to talk about is unable to open AI from Digital Workplace. So basically, if I log on to the Digital Workplace right here, catalog, I have a SID that is configured as Advanced Interface Form. You can see the moment I clicked, I presented with the remedy material URL. And once I log in, I see the AI being opened here. So we have seen a couple customers reported issue against this, like they were not able to open the AIF, and the AIF is working fine from the SRM. So in order to troubleshoot this issue, there are a couple of things that you need to take care of, and that I documented that that solution within KA61651, and there is also a YouTube video available to watch. What all steps that you need to do to configure the AI to open properly from Dieter Workplace. I'll quickly go through the one step. So within SRM pluggable provider right here, you have to make sure that the mid-tier URL has been defined. So many times what happens when Dieter Workplace tries to open the AIF, it do not find the mid-tier URL defined and gives a 9280 error. So you have to make sure that mid-tier URL is configured. The second is the form is registered within the advanced interface, and then reload the providers. That will actually help resolve this particular use case. The next one that I'm going to talk about is unable to broadcast to LDAP group from Dieter Workplace. So as I mentioned, there are two providers. One is group pluggable provider, and the second one is the LDAP pluggable providers. So let's just go through and configure the LDAP pluggable provider. So here, if I enable this provider, let me first see if the group pluggable provider is enabled. I'll uncheck this, and I will enable the LDAP pluggable provider. So I have enabled the LDAP pluggable provider. I populated the details such as what is my LDAP directory server name, what is the user and password that I use to connect to the LDAP, and what is my base URL. So I'll quickly show you the example, what all things that are available within the Exchange. So I'm using this utility called ldp.exe. And here you can see that all this thing, Microsoft Exchange security groups, Microsoft Exchange groups, these are the groups that is present within Active Directory. And we'll see that if this been listed out when you send a broadcast or not. So I enable the provider, I am reloading the provider now, and I'm going to log in again. Here, Alan, password, and then sending a broadcast. So send a broadcast. Let me, before I do that, I'll just quickly show you the logging as well so that you kind of get to know that the logs available within OPT, BMC, SmartIT, MyIT, SmartIT, MyIT logs. I'm just going to do a tail on the ux.log. So here I'm going to say user groups, and here I'm going to type the word Exchange. And you can see that these are the groups that has been listed out from the LDAP. So here you can see that Get Broadcast Group has been, this call has been completed successfully, and we got results. And within this, you can see that it was able to, so if you see an error, you'll be able to see an error from this particular log, ux.log, if there is an error or something of that nature. So that is for LDAP groups. So in this customer cases, what we found out is the base URL was not set up correctly, and it was giving an error that not able to retrieve the results from this base URL. So once we set up the base URL, it was populating the groups from the Active Directory. I documented this within solution 143533. Let's go to the next use case. So the next use case is not able to retrieve the items from the CLM catalogs. So as I mentioned, you can have integration with the Cloud Lifecycle Manager, and here you can see the provider not set up correctly. So I'll quickly go back to the admin console again to show you what exactly we do. So within configuration section, here you can see the provider as CLM Cloud Services Pluggable Provider. So you have to make sure that the provider is enabled, and You have to make sure that these things been defined, like REST URI for this, and that is accessible from MyIT server, as well as if you do this, that URL should open the page. Make sure that it is reachable. So once you set up this and reload the provider, you should be able to retrieve the results. So in this case, the customer did not have that CLM URL set up correctly. Once we set that up, the catalog items are available within the catalog. I documented this as a solution 130966. There is also a YouTube video available step by step. I just showed you the provider and how to get the REST URI, the username and password. All the steps is documented in this video. The next use case is unable to send broadcast to remedy groups. So the reason was the group provider was disabled. So the solution was make sure when you want to use a group provider, LDAP provider is disabled. I documented this as a solution 144659. So I'll just run through a quick use case here. So here we have the group lockable provider disabled at this point, as you can see that, right? And I'll quickly show you the groups that is available, and we will run through and see whether those groups is available when the group provider is disabled. So I'm accessing the form group here, and I'm going to just search against this. So here you can see that we have these groups for which we can send a broadcast. So let's say submitter. So I'm going to use the submitter group to send a broadcast. So for example, if I go to broadcast and say send broadcast, and here if I say submitter, you see that there is no results coming back. And it was trying to search the submitter group within the Active Directory, and there is no submitter group right here. So, but we have a group form within remedy which we want to use. So, to configure this, all you have to do is go to configuration and uncheck this LDAP lockable provider and go to the group provider. Enable this. Once you enable this, you have to reload the providers, and I'm going to use the broadcast feature again. Send broadcast. We want to send it to the submitter group. You can see that the groups have been populated now. So I can select the submitter and then send my message for broadcasting. Let's go to the next one. I think that was the last slide. So here a couple of references, the list of providers that you can go through, which is documented, which will give you the basics of all the list of providers that is available with Digital Workplace. There is also a video available on exploring the providers. I hope you find this material useful. Thank you.